Welcome to video 2 of Unit 7 on cognition. In this video, we're going to be looking at a lot of different stuff. We're going to be looking again at the information processing, thought, and forgetting. I have a lot of information I'm about to throw your way, so make sure you take some quality notes. I'm going to move pretty fast to keep this video as short as possible. So if at any point you need to let everything sink in, pause the video, go back, and move at your own pace, but I'm going to move fairly quickly. All right. First, what's happening in your brain when you're forming a memory, there's actually synaptic changes that are happening. So this is where multiple neurons are communicating together, moving back and forth to create a memory. So long-term memory is forming at the synapse of a neuron using these chemical traces, these very fragile chemical traces that will gradually consolidate into more permanent synaptic changes over time the more that you use them. So it's kind of like breadcrumbs. Right, the more you use, right, so the more you go back and forth between the two synapses here, right, it creates a stronger bond. So it creates a thicker, longer memory trail, right? This would explain that when you have a blow to your head, this could create memory loss of recent memories, because probably what it does is it would disrupt the breadcrumb trail that you've left here, all right, that hasn't fully consolidated yet. So it goes poop, and all the breadcrumbs scatter, and then your memory's lost. All right, there's something called long-term potentiation. It's a persistent increase in synaptic strength following high-frequency stimulation of a chemical synapse. Studies of long-term potentiation are often carried out in slices of the hippocampus. So most of this takes place in your hippocampus. Brain cells that are used for mental exercises, such as language and math problems, actually have a tendency to last longer than those that aren't used. This can vary from person to person based on a person's activities. So if you practice foreign language, but you don't practice algebra, you're more likely to forget your algebra but remember your foreign language. All right, this all goes back to creating that thick trail of breadcrumbs. All right, the more you go back and forth, you're leaving more and more breadcrumbs back and forth, strengthening and thickening that trail, creating long-term potentiation. Now, there's different ways in which we can measure your retention. So if something has been learned, all right, and the ways that we do this are through recall, recognition, and relearning. So getting the information out through recall, recognition, and relearning. Teachers, we do this in the form of assessments, right? When we give you a test or a quiz, we're using one or more of these methods to try and get you to show us that it has made its way, that whatever you learn has made its way into long-term storage, and you just got to retrieve it and get it back out. All right. Recognition is when you identify something you learned previously and it's therefore stored in some manner in your long-term memory. For example, when you take a multiple choice test, it requires you to identify material that you're not necessarily recalling information you previously learned, but you're having to recognize a word out of a series of multiple choice answers. So for example, when I give you the Edmodo quiz or a test in class, or any teacher does this, whenever you have a multiple choice question. So a question's been asked, all right? All you have to do is, out of the 4 or 5 answer choices, is recognize the term that is most familiar to you that relates back to that situation. All right, so you have a word bank. You're not completely flying in the dark. Now, if you didn't have the multiple choice option and they wanted you to answer the question just straight out, right out of your memory, that's recall. That's where you're bringing a thought or idea that you learned previously back to your conscious awareness. So you have to actually recall the information. You have to bring it out of your long-term memory without any help. You're not recognizing a word from a word bank. You're all on your own. So this you do this with essays, fill in the blanks, things like that, where you're not given a word bank to work off of. You actually have to go in and get the information back out and put it down. Relearning, it measures how much faster you learn material that has been previously learned and then forgotten. So for example, let's say you had to memorize Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech at the beginning of your freshman year. Right? It took you 10 hours to memorize the whole thing. At the end of the school year, you don't remember it really, so you have to go back and relearn the material. But this time, you're able to recite the speech flawlessly after only 5 hours instead of 10. All right. So basically, for another example would be where for preparing for your final exam or preparing for your AP exam, we have to go back and you have to relearn um, some of the material from previous units. All right, it won't take us as long as it did the first time you learned it because odds are it's in there somewhere. We just have to bring it back out, and it's going to take time to kind of give your brain those retrieval cues to be able to bring it back out. You are going to have to relearn material, but it won't take you as long because you will have done it once before already. You heard me say the term retrieval cues. Okay, retrieval cues are hints that make it easier for you to recall information. So if you're thinking of your brain as a computer, retrieval cues are like Google. All right, you're going to go in and you're going to type in a certain word or clues, type it in, hit enter, and it brings you to, you know, your memory, the actual source. Right? Memories are held together by a web of associations. So you associate a memory with a certain smell, a certain sight, a certain word. All right. Um, but however, retrieval cues are only as good as the memory itself. So retrieval will depend on the type of memory and how well it was encoded or stored. So being able to retrieve that memory, it's not automatic unless you have accurate retrieval cues in place. Again, you could have, if you think back to video one, you could have messed up in encoding. You could have messed up in storage. You might remember it, but it's going to make it harder to recall because you're typing in the wrong search terms. All right. Well, you're typing in the right search terms, but it didn't get stored right. All right. So it's the association isn't there. All right. Types of retrieval cues. Uh, there's different methods to using these retrieval cues. Imagery is the first one. That's pretty much that's probably the best one to use is using mental pictures. Anytime you can attach pictures to something, you remember it a lot better. Mnemonics is another type of memory aid. Um, it's a technique that uses vivid imagery and organizational devices. We're going to talk about a couple of those now. Methods of loci, peg word, link method, chunking, acronyms, they're all mnemonic devices that you can use as retrieval cues to put in your Google search and it'll bring back the full memory. Methods of loci, it's a mnemonic device, like I said, which uses visualization and organization to recall information. So to remember a speech or a story, you can walk around to a familiar place in your house and have and associate different parts of your speech with a different part of your house. So basically, you are linking the part of your speech to a specific location. So you're linking a location to um, your whatever it is that you're doing. So for example, when you're memorizing your speech, you go to the front door when you're saying your introductory sentence. You walk down the hallway for the next part and go to the stairs for the next part. So now when you're trying to remember your speech, it's going to make it easier to, okay, I'm going to go to the front door. Oh, that's my introductory. I'm going to walk down the hallway, and now you're starting to say the next part, and you're at the stairs, and you say the next part. Okay, so basically you're learning through location and to make it easier for yourself. Okay, next you have peg word, which is where you're going to memorize a jingle and then associate that with a list that you're trying to remember. It works even better if you can visualize items while you're trying to do this. So for example, you're going to memorize the jingle, 1 is bun, 2 is shoe, 3 is tree, 4 is door. All right, in order for you to memorize the list I have here, lettuce, banana, cheese, tomato, and it's even better if you could put pictures of that together. Probably another really good example, I can think of a better example than this actually is, if any of you know all 50 of the states in order, alphabetical order, then you've probably been taught the song The 15 of the United States back in elementary school. If not, Google it. If you can memorize that song, all right, you're memorizing a tune, and then all 50 states in alphabetical order to the tune of that song. Right? It makes it a lot easier to remember. It's just more fun that way too. I could tell you all 50 of the states in alphabetical order, and you'd be like, wow, that's really nifty. You're so smart. But no, it's just because I memorized the lyrics to a song. It was as simple as that. So do that for yourself when it comes to memorizing some things. Try to put it to a jingle. All right? That's peg word. For AP World History, go to YouTube and type in history teachers AP World History or history teachers world history, and they'll come up with actual songs like Lady Gaga and things like that, but related to historical events. So when you're trying to remember the French Revolution, it's going to come back with the tune to a Lady Gaga song, but with new lyrics. Right? It's really interesting. Link method. Another type of mnemonic device where you're forming mental images of items and then linking them together. So I need to think of newspaper, lamp, pen, umbrella. So I have these pictures in my mind. All right, they're the ones that are on the slide. Now I need to link them together in a story in order for me to help remember them. All right, so I'm going outside with my umbrella because it's raining. I'm picking up my newspaper. I come inside. I want to fill out the crossword puzzle in there with my pen, but it's dark in my house, so I need the lamp. Right? I need to turn the light on. So in order to remember these images, all right, I have to kind of link them together in a story that makes sense for me. Right? So again, this is something that you could use in my class or any class. All right. Now try this. You have 30 seconds to memorize this number. Don't cheat and write it down. Just look at it and memorize it. You have 30 seconds. I'm still here. Keep memorizing. All right, now write down the number you just saw. Don't cheat and go back. Just write it down as best you can. Are you struggling already? All right. Why do you think that is? What would have made that number easier for you to memorize? I'll tell you. It's something called chunking. Chunking is organizing items into familiar, manageable units. Chunking makes it easier, especially if you're interested in history. So when it comes to dates, if you memorize dates, right, that's a form of chunking. Another way to think of chunking is if you think about that number I just asked you to memorize, break it down like you would your phone number or your social security number. All right. Same thing. All right. If your phone number didn't have those dashes in it, all right, it would be a lot harder for you to memorize. Same with your social security number. As soon as we put those dashes in there and chunk it and break it down, it's a lot easier. All right, so try chunking when it comes to memorizing things. Not just numbers, though. You can actually do it with, you know, words or lists. So, for example, your mom gives you a list of ingredients to make muffins. It's a long list of ingredients. So, in order for you to memorize this whole list, figure out a way to chunk and break down the list. So, for example, maybe you want to chunk, divide up the ingredients into dry ingredients and wet ingredients, and that might help. Acronyms are also a form of chunking, which it in itself, again, is another type of mnemonic device. So for example, PEMDAS, or please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, we've probably all used this in math at some point, and it's made our lives a whole lot easier because now we know, all right, parentheses comes first, then exponents, multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. It made the problem a lot easier because you've chunked the information down in how to solve it using an acronym. All right, next thing, spell the word bear. Write down your paper, spell the word bear. How did you spell it? Did you spell it B-E-A-R? Why didn't you spell it B-A-R-E? As in everyone has the right to bear arms. All right. Odds are you spelled it B-A-R-E because you had a picture of a bear right in front of you, right? Right. It's because I primed you to answer that way. All right, priming is providing clues that stimulate memory without your awareness of there being a connection between the cue and the retrieved memory. So when I asked you to spell bear, you just naturally said, okay, B-E-A-R. Easy, right? but you had a picture of a bear there already priming you, guiding you to the answer that I wanted. And it was not exactly a conscious thought. You just did it, didn't you? All right. Now, if the picture of the bear wasn't there, maybe I would have had a mix of responses. Some people still would have spelled it B-E-A-R, but some of you would have actually probably done B-A-R-E. All right. Priming, think about it's a memoryless memory. All right. Because it's done without your conscious awareness. All right. It predisposes you to interpret something a certain way. So, for example, look at the two lists to the right of the slide. Red, blue, orange, yellow. You probably filled this in as green, right? Plum, nectarine, pear, apple. You probably filled that in as grape, all right? It's all based on context clues around it. Speaking of which, context effects states that the context or environmental factors that surround an event will affect how an event is perceived or remembered. So context effects kind of goes along with priming. Another thing that context effects goes around is actually go back to methods of loci in a little bit. Context effects could actually affect the way that you um, retrieve information for an exam as well. So for example, when you take the AP exam, all right, in in May, all right, how can you being removed from my room, put in another room, actually affect the way that you are able to do on your AP exam? Well, I'll tell you. Okay, research shows that if you were to take the AP exam in our classroom, all right, in your same seat that you always sit in, you'd probably do better. All right, because it's easier for you because you're in like a comfortable surrounding. All right, but when you get taken out of that area that you're comfortable in and you get put into another room you're not familiar with, it makes it harder to retrieve things. All right, so if this is true, then how should you actually study for your AP exam? In what context? Well, bottom line, the more closely the retrieval queue matches the form in which the information was encoded, the better the information will be retrieved. So when it comes to studying at home, should you study on the floor? Should you study laying on your bed? Odds are it'll help you out the most in the long run if you study on something that's similar to a desk. Try to make the environment as similar as possible to the environment that you will be taking the test in, and it'll help you. All right, so put it in context. Also, rehearse, right? There's two types of rehearsals. Maintenance rehearsal, which is basically repeated rehearsal. It's the process of repeatedly verbalizing or thinking of information. So for example, all right, you're a late night and you've been out partying all night and you get back home and you're hungry. You decide to order some pizza. So you pick up the phone to call. Uh, information, you get the number of the pizza delivery place, and then the operator gives you the number, right? Because you're tired, you're not thinking to use your phone or like Google or anything. So you call the operator and they give you the number, and you have to memorize it real quick and then call. All right, so you keep repeating it over and over and over in your head and you call. All right, that's maintenance rehearsal. Right, it won't help get the information into long-term memory, but it will help get it into short-term memory a little bit longer to hold it there. So you keep repeating the same thing in your head over and over and over and over again. All right, that's repeated rehearsal or maintenance rehearsal. Then you have elaborative rehearsal, which is practice, which is actually more effective, where you're connecting the new information with previously stored, already existing associative structures. So for example, when your sixth grade teacher used to make you put a vocabulary word into context in a sentence, this combines the new information, the vocabulary word, with an associative structure, all right, the use of it in a sentence. So this is where those pesky examples come in when it comes to IDs. All right, you're not just memorizing a definition, but you have to kind of pair it with something and put it into context. So you have to practice with it. Now, the difference between maintenance rehearsal or repeated rehearsal and elaborative rehearsal or practice is that if you think about when you call rehearsal for a play, right? You're in drama, you're rehearsing for a play. You're not practicing for a play. All right. It's called rehearsal because you are repeating the same lines over and over again. You're just repeating, all right? You're It's maintenance. You're just maintaining the information. Whereas elaborative rehearsal, think of it as practice, right? For sports, you practice, all right? Because you're not doing the same thing over and over and over again. You're actually working with different scenarios of the same thing, right? So think about practice for sports and how that's different from rehearsal for a play. All right, we'll talk about this whole concept more in class. Deja vu. We've probably all experienced this at some point. Cues from the current situation may unconsciously trigger retrieval of a similar experience. So basically, it's your mind is tricking you with deja. So again, it's cues from the current situation that you're currently in. It unconsciously triggers the retrieval of a memory that's similar, but you think it's the same thing, but it's not. Your mind just tricked you. That's all deja vu is. Mood congruent memory indicates that when humans store memories, they not only store the event, but they also store the memory of the mood that they were in at the time. So for this reason, when we feel happy, we recall other happy memories. Likewise, when we feel depressed, we bring back unhappy memories. For this reason, it's easier to remember events when a person is in the same state of mind as when the memory actually happened. Now, there's something called false memories. All right. It's an apparent recollection of an event that did not actually occur, especially one of childhood sexual abuse arising from suggestions during psychotherapy. Right. There's also something called misinformation effect, which is basically you were misinformed the first time around and that kind of stuck with you even though it's false. Children are more prone to having false memories, basically just because they're not as good at encoding memories accurately yet, so it's very easy for them to misinterpret something and have a false memory created. An eyewitness recall. All right, so eyewitness testimony is actually ridiculously unreliable because they may remember something when it happened, but if they were super excited when it happened and they're all like frazzled, all right, it actually makes it harder for them to remember key details, as well as down the line at a trial that may not happen until a while later, and they're being asked to testify to something that may have happened a year or two ago. All right, odds are their facts are going to be a little shady, and if the lawyer's asking them, this is why on direct examination you don't want a lawyer asking leading questions because it may give them a false memory, like did you see this person with the gun? Right? If it's a yes or no question, odds are that person might be like, well, yeah, and falsely remember it. All right. So this is where eyewitness recall is not exactly accurate because it could result in false memories. And actually, this lady right here, I'm going to post a video from her in a little along with this video for you to watch. It's really interesting. It talks about false memories, children, eyewitness recall, things like that. I highly recommend watching it. It's not required, but I think you will find it really interesting. Source amnesia. How many of you, this refers to the inability to remember from where existing knowledge actually was acquired. For a basic example, for most of us, we remember how we learned how to read and how to write, but we don't remember learning to walk. Right? It's believed to be caused by some sort of disconnect between your semantic, or your verbal memory, and your episodic memory. Right? So it's basically you learn the fact, you just for the life of you can't remember where you learned it from. Right? So you can't remember the source of where you learned it from. Which brings me to forgetting. Inability to retrieve information due to poor encoding, storage, or retrieval. That's all forgetting is. Now, there's different types of forgetting and there's different theories behind it. All right, so why do we forget? When it comes to short-term memory, there's trace decay, which is unless the information is refreshed or rehearsed, it will just spontaneously fade or decay over time. However, this doesn't explain one thing. Why do we never forget how to ride a bicycle? Right? That doesn't seem to decay. But, so that kind of throws that theory a little bit. Displacement is only a fixed number of slots. You only have a fixed number of slots in your memory capacity. So in order for new information to come in, you have to displace old information once that capacity has been reached. There could be an encoding failure. Because of displacement, this information never reached long-term memory. All right, so this brings back up why you never forget to ride a bicycle, trace decay theory. All right. Now, forgetting with long-term memory, interference, retrieval failure, and motivated forgetting. Interference, more information will be stored and become confused together, so they interfere with each other. We'll also talk a little bit in this about this in class, but we'll call it transference, or like transfer of information. Then you have retrieval failure. Information may be available, but temporarily inaccessible. You just can't retrieve it for whatever reason. And we'll talk about something called tip of the tongue theory. Motivated forgetting. We may actively work to forget certain memories. Two basic forms of this are suppression and repression. Okay. So back to retrieval failure. Forgetting can result from failure to retrieve information from long-term memory. And a type of retrieval failure is actually called tip of the tongue phenomenon. How many of you, well, it's failing to recall a word or idea, but you know that it's in your memory. This probably happens to you all the time. Like it's right on the tip of your tongue. All right. Why does this happen? Well, interference, all right, during recall, poor matching between retrieval cues and encoding information. So you're struggling to find those associations. You know it's there. You're struggling with finding it to get it back out. There's two types of interference, proactive and retroactive. Proactive interference is where old information will interfere with remembering new information. So for example, you got a new phone number, but when someone asks you for your phone number, you give them the old one. All right. So the old information interfered with you learning the new, which would be your new number. For example, math. How many of you learn to solve a math problem one way and you're like, all right, I figured out how to solve it. I don't care how the teacher said how to do it. They said to solve it this way. I found out how to solve the information that way. But the teacher's like, no, you can't do that because you need to do it this way because it's not going to work your way for every single problem. You go to do it your way for every single problem and you start getting things wrong. All right. How you learned it before is now interfering with you doing the new problems, right? So you should listen to the teacher. All right. Retroactive interference is learning new information that's going to interfere with recalling old information. So for example, if you're currently taking calculus and your younger sibling asks you for help in algebra, which you should know because you're in calculus now, but you can't help them because you're learning something new and it's like kind of pushing out the old. The old stuff's not priority anymore. All right. A way to fix that though is to sleep on it because odds are you can recall your algebra stuff. Your brain just only has enough strength to be able to recall the calculus work. All right. So sleep on it and it's going to bring the memories from algebra back, make it easier because odds are you're just tired and you're putting too much energy on calculus. You don't have the energy to bring out the algebra. All right. Theories of forgetting. Here we are with Freud. All right. Repression is a conscious process of burying memories. The emotions associated with the repressed memory may be recovered or express themselves through dream analysis, hypnosis, free association. So Freud came up with the forgetting theory of repression. You're trying to repress something. All right. There's also something called amnesia. We could forget due to amnesia, which is partial or complete memory loss. There's two types of causes for amnesia, physical and psychological. Physical is basically there was damage to some part of the brain, whether it be Alzheimer's, stroke, brain trauma, and psychological amnesia, which is triggered by some type of traumatic event. But most memories with psychological amnesia will return over time, usually in a few days. More types of amnesia. Retrograde, which is the inability to remember ongoing events after an incident or trauma or the onset of disease. So you can't remember anything that happens after your trauma. And retrograde is the inability to remember events that occurred before the disease or before the trauma. So ways that you can improve your memory. 1, focus your attention on the materials that you are studying. 2, avoid cramming by establishing regular study sessions. 3, structure and organize the information you're studying. 4, utilize mnemonic devices to remember information. 5, elaborate and maintenance rehearsal to keep you informed of what you're studying. 6, relate new information to things you already know. 7, visualize concepts to improve memory and recall. 8, teach new concepts to another person. We did that in class. 9, pay extra attention to difficult information. 10, vary your studying routine. And 11, get some sleep. All right? Like if you're staying up late and watching this video right now, as soon as this is done and the Edmodo, go to bed. All right, so to review everything in this video, and then I'm done. All right. Contrast recall, recognition, relearning, all right, as measures of memory. Describe the importance of retrieval cues and the impact of environmental context and internal emotional states on retrieval. What are false memories and what role do they play? Discuss the role of encoding failure and storage decay in the process of forgetting. And we'll explain what is meant by retrieval failure and discuss the effects of interference and motivated forgetting on retrieval. So if you can answer those questions based on this video and the notes that you took, you are ready to take that Edmodo quiz that I will post as soon as I'm done posting this video. All right? Winter is coming, and so is that psychology exam. Bring it. All right? Good night.